it's not permissible. And for a veteran in marriage, somebody who's tried it all anyway for so many years, and for that person it's not permissible. However, there are other issues. For example, Ibn Umar radiallahu an, one of the greatest Sahaba, one of the younger ones, but one of the greatest Sahaba as well, son of Umar radiallahu an, he narrated that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the deceased, the one who's died, he is punished due to the crying of his household on him or her. So if somebody passes away and the household cries over them, then that person will be punished for based on that crying. And that was his perspective, that was his understanding of what he had heard and interpreted of the way the Prophet ﷺ had given a certain command. Whereas Aisha radiallahu anha, she said that this was regarding a particular Jewish woman who had passed away, and her family was wailing and crying over her, and the Prophet ﷺ's statement about her being punished was not that she was being punished because of her family crying, but the fact that what's the point of them crying over her death when she's being punished? There was just a correlation, it was not a causation. Whereas Ibn Umar radiallahu anh took it as a causation as opposed to a correlation or a coincidence. So you had difference of interpretation during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. One event that would take place, one of the Sahaba would think that, oh, this is the reason why the Prophet ﷺ said this. And another one would say, no, I know it's because of this reason. And obviously where this would differ is the level of intellectual acumen, level of ijtihad, level of faqaha, which is a deeper kind of insight into the way the Sharia works and the spirit of the Sharia. So for example, if Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu relates something, and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu relates something to the same effect, but his understanding is different from Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu's, most of the fuqaha, most of the jurists, the experts in this field, would probably take Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's narration radiallahu anh, because his level of juristic insight, his level of faqaha was a lot greater than Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh was more of a very proficient narrator as opposed to as great a jurist as people like Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anh, Ibn Umar radiallahu anh, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anh. So obviously, when Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anh would say something, his understanding would probably be based both on fiqh. He'd be interpreting the event based on his understanding of fiqh and jurisprudence and the other things that he had understood from the Prophet ﷺ. Whereas Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, you could expect him to be relating it more in a veridical sense, in a more verbatim sense as such, more literal sense, as opposed to with as much insight as Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anh. Both had their positions. It's not to say that one is inferior. They're only inferior in sense of level of faqaha, and because not all the Sahaba were the same in their level of insight into fiqh. They were not all muftis, right? Only some were the muftis, as we would call them, who had that level to be able to legislate. So what you have, for example, you have another situation where it mentions that a janazah passed by, a funeral procession passed by with them, picking up the bier, and the Prophet ﷺ stood up. Now, why did he stand up? Some were of the perspective and opinion that he stood up out of respect for that, out of respect for that funeral. Whereas the others, it said that this was actually a Jewish person's funeral that was going past by, and the Prophet ﷺ didn't want it to go over his head, and thus he stood up. So it was not out of reverence, but it was more out of not, wanting it to go over his head. But there was a difference of opinion in the way people interpreted this. Now this is natural. There's nothing wrong with this. This is human. This is the human condition. This is the way humans function, right? And only the prophets are directly revealed upon. Only the prophets get direct revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and wahi. Not everybody else. Everybody else is prone to error. Only the prophets, only the messengers alayhimu salatu wasalam are those that are infallible and that don't commit error in this regard. And because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's guiding them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's revealing to them. In huwa illa wahyun yuha. It's a revelation that comes down from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and is revealed by Allah. Whereas everybody else could make a misunderstanding. when we look at events, each one of us may interpret it slightly differently. In fact, if you go back and you say what the speaker, if two of you go and explain what the speaker was saying, I guarantee you that your stories will be slightly variant, will be slightly different. They won't be entirely the same. In fact, if I tell you to just write about just a paragraph of what you think, or to describe this design, right? Or what the color of this door is, each of you will describe it differently. That's the human condition. We're all unique in our perspective, in our way, in our nature, and in our understanding, and even in our opinions. The point is that it needs to conform to the spirit of the Sharia, and that's what's important. So now you understand that from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was the reason for differences of opinions to occur, because of the way the Sahaba may have interpreted something, or because of the Prophet ﷺ may have said something to one person, another thing to another person, based on either their circumstance, or based on that one was a general ruling and the other one was a specific ruling for that person. Now, it's up to the people who come later on to look at these and say, why exactly is there a difference of opinion here? Why did the Prophet ﷺ say one thing here and another thing here? And this is where something very important comes in. This call for studying of Bukhari, only. And, I've studied Bukhari, I've read the entire book, alhamdulillah, as most of the ulama have. It's not easy. Within one section, within one chapter, you will have one hadith that says one thing, another hadith that has an apparent contradiction, that says something else. Because the Prophet ﷺ said both of these things. And the Sahaba related it according to what they had heard. Now, how are you able to look into Bukhari and get your answers? Because you'd be more confused than anything else. That's why there was a need and a requirement, which the ulama completely perceived, like Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, Qastallani, Aini, etc. And they wrote these massive commentaries of 18 to 20 volumes that would just describe the ahadith, why Imam Bukhari brought a particular hadith here and not there, and why there is a difference of opinion, and exactly why the case was that this contradicts this. Obviously they're all superficial contradictions. You call them superficial contradictions that can be easily reconciled, but you need the knowledge. So you can't just look, if you're looking, for example, if you're looking for a ruling for a particular matter, you can't just look in one book. You can't just look at one hadith, the first hadith you see and say, great, that's what I'm going to act on. Because there could be 40 hadith on that particular issue, and it requires the mujtahid to look at this, the reader to look at all of this, and then to try to determine the common thread in all of these, to try to pick out exactly why the Prophet ﷺ said this or did this, and then to give a ruling based on that. It's not an easy issue. And I'll explain later, I'll try to go through some of the basic requirements for a mujtahid, for a person that can exercise this kind of independent judgment, or this exercise of, or this endeavor of trying to extract and infer a ruling. I'll try to go through some of these things afterwards. But right now, let's just keep to our history. So now you understand that in the ahadith, there is enough scope. And I'm saying this in a positive sense, there's enough scope for the differences of opinion that we see today. So it's not an alien thing, it's not a foreign thing, it's inherent within the system, but there's a benefit and there's a wisdom to it, which I'll come to later. Now, what happens is, during the time of the Sahaba, after the Prophet ﷺ departed from this world, many of the Sahaba, they moved out of Medina Munawwara. They went to Kufa and Basra and other cities around the Muslim world, and they began teaching. A number of students would flock to them to understand the matters of the deen, to listen to the ahadith from them, to listen to the rulings. Now some were narrating ahadith, others were also practitioners of this ahadith, in the sense that they were also inferring rulings. They were developing a legal system. Because as you know now, after the time of the Prophet ﷺ, Islam began to spread. It began to spread, it went into the Transox area, it went up to Azerbaijan, Armenia, and towards that area. It took over the entire Persian Empire, which is current day Iraq, Iran, and so on and so forth. It went up to Sham. Already these things had started during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but it expanded. Now you had people from different cultures, different ideologies, different customs, and different ways of doing things. They wanted to know whether they could retain what they've been doing under Islam, or whether it was something alien to Islam and it had to